Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Thunder, and this is Tenor Talks. Tenor Talks. And Tenor Talks is my show with my colleague and fellow saxophonist and educator, Dr. Robert Brooks. Dr. Robert Brooks. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the practice routine. We're going to be talking about tips for optimizing your practice routine. And I think this is going to be a really good show. So those of you that have had some challenges consistently making progress in the practice room, those of you that feel like you have sort of stagnated, you sort of have been at the same place for a long time, those of you that are just trying to optimize, maybe you're still getting better, but you still are trying to squeeze a little bit more out. I think today's the show for you. And this is aimed at anywhere from middle school, high school, all the way up to, college and professionals. Because the stuff that we're going to be talking about, I think, is universal principles, but we will try to aim for more of the sort of high school, college age range for this information. So it's that time. Let's go. What's happening, man?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah. We had a great show, great pilot show last week, talking about careers basically in music. And today's show is going to be all about practice tips. It's going to be all about how to get a little bit more out of your time in the practice room. Um, so, you have any initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was excited, when we were talking about topics because this is something I'm personally really passionate about because I found myself as a student, um, you know, given a lot of information that was, I need you to work on this, you should be working on this thing, but then no method to work on, to like actually work on that stuff. And so I found myself in a practice room just, throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what fits. And that ultimately, I think, is just certainly not the most efficient use of anyone's time. And so a
Right.
lot of the things that I do in my teaching, to students here at Ohio State is really focused on making sure they're aware of the methodology and specific things to practice, but also how to achieve those things and then how they are going to kind of, are they going to benefit their playing in the long run. And so all that stuff gets into practice efficiency and big tips, big ideas, small ideas. So I'm looking forward to it for sure. So I think it's going to be important information for everybody.
Yeah, great. You are a little choppy. I wonder if it will
Uh
be
oh.
helped by going out and then coming back in. Sometimes that will help.
Oh,
Why don't you try
sure.
that?
Yeah.
Still,
Is that is
still choppy, but it's all right. I can understand what you're saying. I didn't have a problem hearing anything that you were saying. Maybe it's just that's what it is right now. So it's okay. So
okay?
so you were talking about um, you know, and I think all of us have gone through this. You go in the practice room, and you don't really have a strategy. You just start doing a bunch of stuff, and
Mhm.
you can kind of get a little bit. You can get going that way, but you're going to get to a place where you're not going to get past that. You're going to hit a wall, and unless you start making more efficient judgments, going into the practice room with a plan, for instance, is one of the things that I talk to my students about, and I know it's something that you talk to them about. Um, and something else that I talk to them about is documenting what it is that they do, so that in conjunction with having a plan, so basically putting yourself on a curriculum. Here's the curriculum. Here are the things that I need to cover. Okay, the things I'm going to address today, you know, or this couple things that I need to deal with. Okay, I address those things. Then you keep track of what it is. So then the next day you don't go in and like, man, I wonder what I practiced yesterday. I don't remember exactly what happened. What tempo did I practice that thing at? I don't remember that either. So then you end up wasting a lot of time. And if you're like me, um, I have other stuff to do.
Hmm.
So being efficient is very, very important. It needs to really be laser focused, or it's just going to be a bunch of farting around. Now, granted, I love farting around. That's like my favorite thing to do, you know, but that's not actually productive. What do you think?
Yeah, everything in moderation with that for sure. Uh, yeah, I and I'm hoping, is my voice clear?
Yeah, yeah, you're totally clear. Yep.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if it was any better or not. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I joke about that with especially high school students that take lessons from me, is that same idea. as I say, I'm sure the only thing you or music isn't the only thing you do. You probably have homework.
Oh,
You
right.
probably want to hang out with your friends. You
Yep.
probably have family you want to see. There really it's anything. So that means that in order for you to make as much progress as possible, I have to squeeze as much value out of the time I invest into my playing.
100%.
And that's super super important. And I agree. Part of that is having a plan. Obviously any kind of practice is better than no practice. But even again, another step ahead of that, one level better is being able to be organized. And often, the more organized you are, the more efficient you are. And a word I use a lot in my own teaching, both for from a saxophone playing standpoint, but also from an improvisation standpoint, is the idea of being intentional, not not letting things be up to chance. It doesn't just happen, and oh, I can do this, or I don't know why I can't do that. I don't know why I'm not getting better. Having intentionality in your practice goes a really really long way, and ultimately having intentionality in your playing obviously goes a long way too. So I think all those things are great.
Absolutely. That's great. That's great. Um, Now, so one of the things that uh, is always discussed in this context is the actual practice routine itself. And I think of a practice routine as being sort of a procedure. It's the sort of order of operations. It's the, uh, you want to cover, I think, four basic topics. Some people call it three, some people call it four, depending. It's possible that one of these categories could fit into one of the other categories. But the four broad categories I consider are are uh, are warming up. Okay, there we go. All right, so the four categories that I consider are warming up, and the stuff that I put in the warm up category is tone development. So stuff like long tones, um, stuff like harmonic series exercises, overtone exercises, rudiments. So rudiments would be like, you know, scales in all keys, different shapes and patterns, scales and thirds, full range scales, extended range scales, you know, stuff that's played in 12 keys, you know, arpeggios. The universal stuff
Yeah.
is the full range scales, arpeggios, and scales and thirds. That's the stuff that everybody needs to practice. Doesn't matter what the instrument is. That is the stuff to practice, and that's the stuff that folks have been practicing for, you know, centuries. And
Hmm.
it is, and the reason for that is because it's highly effective. And then some sort of yeah. So those are the things in the warm up. Then the second thing I say is uh, etudes and transcriptions. And so when I say transcription in jazz, basically an etude is a transcription, right? So for the most part, now there are sort of jazz etude books, but my preference is just to go to the horse's mouth. Okay, and the purpose of an etude is to address a particular problem area. Could be stylistic issue, could be a technical issue, could be um, a rhythmic feel issue, could be a number of things. Could be a pitch tendency issue, could be all kinds of different things. Syncopation, um, you know, all of those kinds of things. So that's the purpose of an etude, practicing etudes, which is also satisfied by practicing transcriptions. So that's why I basically consider transcriptions to basically be the jazz etude. You know, number three is improvisation, and of
Hmm.
course that's a huge category. All kinds of stuff, you know, can be considered there, and that could include anywhere from practicing stuff in all keys like 2 5 1s turnarounds, all kinds of stuff, and then actually implementing those things over a form.
Mm-hmm.
Taking certain concepts and ideas and developing them further. And then the fourth thing is repertoire and performance preparation. Now, when I say performance prep, that can also be stuff like practicing sight reading, and
Mm-hmm.
also something else that I talk about, sight transposition. Because I don't know if you've been on gigs where they throw a concert chart in front of you and say 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Let's go.
Yeah.
So, what do you think of
Or
that
even
stuff?
worse with,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say even worse with you get doubling. Oh, I thought you were playing alto on this, so I have an E flat part, but if you can play it on tenor, that'd be great. And yeah, getting that's a very important skill. Um, yeah, which I think is often is I don't want to say under taught, but I think it's one of those things where you don't know you need it until you need it. Until
Right.
you're on stage and you're like, oh my gosh. And it's easy to sit down and go, oh yeah, I can transpose a fourth. Oh, B flat, that's an E flat. Oh, an A natural, that's an E natural. Sure. Or that's a fifth, sorry. Um, but it's different when you're, reading something and dealing with a key signature and dealing with accidentals and doing all those things. That's a very, very important skill. I agree.
Yeah. So as far as the categories that I laid out, and like I say, everybody probably has a slight nuance or a little difference on this. What do you think of that sort of block? So warm up, etudes, transcriptions, improvisation, repertoire, and performance prep. Now repertoire, of course, that's learning tunes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I got in the game to play music. So to play actual tunes, to learn tunes. That's what I want to do, not just all of the practice of
Exactly.
scales and stuff. And I practice a lot of scales, but that's a means to an end. That's you know that's not the you're not telling any stories. You're not
Mm-hmm.
going to move anybody with scales. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do that. I do a lot of the same stuff. So my from an organizational standpoint, I usually sell it to people on the four T's of a jazz practice session.
Mm.
And that's tones, tunes, transcriptions, and 2/5s.
Yeah. Yep.
And but it's kind of a lot of the same things. It's the same
Yep.
elements. So a lot of times what I have students work on, in the warm-up category, which I think is really, really important. That was something that really kind of changed my practicing and what it looked like on a day-to-day basis was learning to have a set warm-up as a part of a practice session. And I think a part of that is giving yourself the opportunity to hit things on a daily basis and having repetition and consistency is obviously very important. But in the same vein, it's also about getting yourself focused and in the right mindset, right? It's very easy, I think more than ever now to easily to get distracted or be distracted, not even to have something distract you, but just even walking into a practice room and you're already bringing in distractions. And people are certainly the most accessible that they've ever been. Content and media is the most accessible accessible that it's ever been. And so I think the importance of a warm up as a part of a daily session is important. And then on top of that, what you work on in that is also helpful. So I usually, as a part of a daily warm up, and in that warm up category, I'm definitely thinking of scales and patterns. I'm thinking about audiating certain things and learning, working on scales as usually using scales and patterns as a vehicle to do many things. A
Mm.
big thing I talk about with that, and kind of maybe an even more broad version of the four categories, is that I have two categories which are abstract or concepts, and then practical items and methods, the things that I work on. And ultimately scales kind of fit in both of those. So I certainly work on full range scales. It's very important, working on thirds and patterns. I have some other patterns that I have students work on as kind of a part of learning major keys and in harmonic minor, particularly for students who are in the first year of our program. And then it's also linking other skills with that. So then it turns into, okay, can you play this pattern accurately and you're really focused on playing with a great sound, right? Are you focused on, let's add this articulation on top of that. Let's add, like a certain dynamics pattern where I'm crescendoing for 4 notes, then I'm coming back for 4, a certain amount of beats or things like that. And using those things as scales to ultimately do what we do when we're performing, which is executing something accurately and then having all these musical elements on top of that. And so I try to create that in an abstract form. And another thing that I do with that a lot is I always obviously encourage students to use a metronome with scales, and using a metronome the right way. I'm a really big proponent of this. So the wrong way to use a metronome is to have the metronome do the work, which is a metronome clicks on every beat and it makes you play in time. And that's kind of I think a dangerous usage of what's going on. Really what I want to happen is I want to use the metronome to make sure I am playing in time, but I need to be the one that generates the time. So usually that means taking away beats. A lot of times I have students at the high school level work on playing patterns and scales with the metronome clicking on 2 and 4 in a jazz style. At a college level, it should be just 2 or 4. And then if you're really crazy, you have it click, less than once a measure or on off beats. And it's really about the metronome is there to make sure your time is good, not to force you into being so subdivided that you have good time that way. And then the other side of that with scales particularly is I play scales and stuff, and that's kind of what I mentioned audiation, is playing scales with a drone. Or sometimes I'll call it putting a scale in context. And that helps me. I think it's a much better way than a lot of people teach ear training to learn intervals and learn how to play in tune and do those things by hearing, not necessarily hearing that stuff in a vacuum. I think a lot of times, you think about how you're talking about, I got into the game to play music, and we kind of think about how kind of odd it can be that, I really want to play music, so let me sit in this room alone. And so I think playing with a drone can kind of help to simulate, here's where that interval is. Here's what that really sounds like. Here's what that is. So a lot of times I have students play scales with the drone. They play through all their patterns with the drone and or a metronome. And then I'll have them improvise in that scale, whatever it may be, with the drone in order to kind of really hear what it's like. And that's something that I started doing in grad school. And where I went to grad school, we had a combo practice room, and I was able to get a key to that room, which was nice. And no one was ever in the building, in the jazz area, at least. Saturday mornings, I figured that out pretty soon. Not a lot of the jazz students were up early on a Saturday morning. And I say early for jazz, so I was there at like 9 a.m. I wasn't there really early. And so I would go into the combo room, had these huge speakers, and I would just blast these speakers to the point where the drone was like, it felt like it was, swallowing me up. And I could really work on getting a huge sound and really filling up and working on tone production, but it also gave me the ability to really hear the intervals and these scales that I was using, and hearing patterns, and here's, this altered triad pair, and here's this, even stuff as similar as, and I think about this for a lot of high school students, can you really hear the difference between Dorian minor and Aeolian? Because they're very similar scales, but they're very important that you can hear that difference. And all of that stuff is just warm-up category, right? We haven't even gotten to the meat of a practice session yet. We have all these things that are going to directly benefit what you're working on. So that's stuff that I put in that category. And I certainly don't want to monopolize this. I probably could talk for the rest of our time just on that. So
yeah. But I like that. I like that. What did you say? Tunes, tone, tunes, transcriptions, and 2/5.
Yep.
Yeah, and
The 4T.
that's a nice. What is that, alliteration?
Yep. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good thing to
So
remember. I gotta get it. I gotta get the 4T's like tattooed on my arm or something.
You could just get a T-shirt, man.
Sure. Either way,
um,
official Dr. Thunder merch here.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So, one thing that I talk to students about, and of course the metronome thing, I thought that was, that's solid gold.
Mm.
Taking the metronome, having it click, maybe you want, every other bar or every fourth bar, every other bar on the end of 2 or something,
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. That's really good because I have these 5 tools that I talk about. So 5 tools. So, and these 5 tools, if students use these, if folks that are practicing consistently use these tools, and they can be used in a variety of different ways, but if they're used consistently, religiously, then they will make a dramatic improvement in a person's musicianship in a pretty short period of time, especially if a couple of these haven't been things that you've been using. So here are the 5 things. The first thing is a metronome. Now, we already kind of talked about a metronome and some of the other things that you can use a metronome. Now, all 5 of these tools are mirrors. So metaphorical mirrors. And what I mean by that is that they're inanimate. They're only telling you what you are. They're reflecting back literally what the actual facts. No fake news. And also the facts don't care about your feelings either. So, so they're
Very
mirrors.
true.
So,
Very
that's
true.
right. So the first thing is a metronome. We talked a little bit about a metronome already. The second thing is a tuner, chromatic tuner. Now, you have some other ways that you're sort of simulating what a tuner would do when you're talking about practicing with a drone. Right? So I would put that in that category. But so chromatic tuner. Now, both of these things, since you're not born with perfect time, you are not born, even a person that's born with perfect pitch or has the potential to develop perfect pitch within the first 3 years or something of their life, can't develop that after that. Even that person, their sense of pitch is calibrated based on the stuff that they listen to. So if you're in another part of the world where there are more notes per octave, then your sense of pitch is going to be developed based on that. If you're if you're from East Asia, then where the tendency is for the pitch to be brighter on the high side, so it's not A440 there. Then that's the thing, and you have some folks now that are experimenting with A432, and supposedly there's some reasons why it more naturally it's a more natural tuning system, and something about vibrations being more in alignment and all this kind of stuff.
Interesting.
But the point is, that's not the point. The bigger issue is you're going to calibrate your sense of pitch based on something external to you, right? So you yourself are not the center of the universe. In your sense of pitch, other people are not calibrating to you. You're calibrating to something else, right? And so that's why the first 2 things are critically important. The third thing is a recorder, audio recorder. Video is great because it'll give you it gives you video plus the audio, and so with that, a person would record all their rehearsals, all their performances. They record, certain segments of their practicing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I used to talk to my students about years ago, before the technology was so readily available, and it got so good, on the phones and stuff, was I'd have them stand in front of a mirror. You stand in front of a mirror and
Oh
look at your
yeah,
fingers. Oh,
I
that
still
whole
do
thing.
that.
And
Yep, very
sometimes I still
important.
and sometimes I still do that. It seems to me that there's probably an advantage to doing a video, because
Mm.
uh, it's I think it's easier to pay attention to what's going on if you're not also engaged in producing what it is you're evaluating. So
Yeah, yeah,
if
yeah.
you can sort of be like a fly on the wall and kind of checking out what's going on, and you can be a little more uh, precise and more critical of what it is that's going on. So
Yeah.
video, and then the last two things are a practice log, so keeping track, and that could go in hand with this idea of having a practice routine and documenting your practice, going into the practice room with an agenda. All that stuff, I'd say, is number four, and then number five is a timer. And
Mm.
a timer is different than the clock on the wall. It's different than looking at your watch frequently, or picking up your phone and looking at to see what time it is. It's different than those things, because every time you look at your device, you've broken focus, and it's going to take
Mm-hmm.
a, a long time for you to dial back into focus. Um, so it's important to get an idea of what your limitations are. Like, how long can I practice a particular thing before I need to switch to something else? And if you set a timer, then you can be totally and thoroughly dialed into what it is that you're doing, and just trust that the timer is going to tell you, okay, 15 minutes is up. It's time to move on to something else. Um,
Yeah,
so what do
yeah.
you so
I agree with a
what do you
lot
think
of
of that
that.
stuff? Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
So I think maybe kind of working backwards in that the timer was something that also really changed my practice. I, as an undergrad, found myself in a practice room, especially my last year as a performance major getting ready for grad school, probably in a practice room 5 or 6 hours a day. And then when I started using a timer, I realized I was really only practicing for like 2 hours of
Yep.
like total time, horn on face. There was a lot of adjacent other things. There was a lot of someone comes in my room and we chat for 10 minutes. There was a lot of I'm on my phone to listen to a recording of something, and all of a sudden it's been 20 minutes and I'm watching a video that's not related to jazz anymore or something like that. And so that was something that really, really helped. If for nothing else, is more of like a wake up call to be like, man, I thought I was practicing this thing for 45 minutes, but the timer says, 20 minutes. I got to work on that, right? That's something that I can do better. Um,
Hey,
so I
hey,
think that's
real,
great.
real,
You
real
mentioned
quick, I
having a
just want
video.
to answer this. I just want to answer this question. Benji's asking, when you say
Yeah.
drone, do you mean a single tone playing for the root in the background? And yes, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I mentioned that and I wanted to talk about that too. I always use the root of whatever scale that I'm improvising in. It could be a mode, it could be, what I kind of refer to as a harmonic system, which are the scales that create modes. But I always want that to be the base because I want to hear the intervals of the scale based on that fundamental pitch. So that's exactly right. I just use there's a channel on if you're watching on YouTube that is called Musicians Practice Partner, and they have these 6 minute long cello drones, which are great because I can get through all the scale patterns and everything I need to get through, and then I still have time to improvise all within that kind of that one thing. So yeah, and that's an important clarification question. So Uh, the uh, and then the other thing you were talking about was the mirror or the video camera. I still use a mirror. It's actually one of the things, we're very fortunate at Ohio State to be, you can kind of see the views of the offices, or it's fantastic new Timashev Music Building that we have. And the one thing that we didn't get, at least in my opinion, in the office is we didn't get any mirrors. And I wish I would have had something like that. So I put one in my office. Um, and none of our practice rooms have them, which I think is something we need to remedy, in my opinion. But but I agree with you. I think what I like about a mirror is that it's often really accessible. I kind of have to like set up my phone and stuff like that. And having a mirror is quicker. But I totally agree with that concept of it is a video camera is overall better because it gives me the ability to focus on one thing and then focus on the other thing. It takes a long time to really develop the awareness it takes to, and I talk about, the creative cycle a lot of the time. So the creative cycle is I create something, then I perceive, and then it influences me, and I develop it, and it kind of goes in and out. And that's just a ton of like brain power to be able
It's a
to
lot of
do that.
processor power. Yep.
And yeah, and so one of the things you can do to make that a little bit easier, especially if you're a less experienced musician, is to have the camera do the perception for you. And I'm focusing on creating, and then I can go back and watch the video and I go, oh, look at that thing I'm doing. Or, in the moment I thought this was really cool, but I go back and maybe it wasn't as cool as I thought it was. Or vice versa, right? I've walked off stage a couple times and thought, man, I wasn't really happy with how that went, how that solo sounded or something like that. And then I get the recording, like maybe a couple of weeks later or something, and it was like, oh no, that was actually really good, right? And so it's not just, and I like what you said. It's a mirror in that metaphorical way of it gives you this unbiased reaction. So you don't have to ask somebody and, oh, they want to be polite. So yeah, I thought it sounded good. It's going to give you, the literal facts. Absolutely. Yeah. And so that is something I think is super, super, super important. Really being wary of that. So that's something that I do. And it's the most accessible, when I was middle school and high school student, I had to convince my dad to go buy me something to record myself and listen back. And I had I had to get like an external microphone, and it was kind of this setup. And I had to use Christmas gifts. I could have gotten video games, and I got that stuff instead. But now with the advent of our phones, everyone has a pretty high quality video and audio recorder, certainly for what we're talking about doing, on you all the time. It's another thing about tools. I really like that, tools to help you be successful. Having a metronome app on your phone, very, very important. Something that I joke with students all the time. I will go a lot of places without a metronome. I rarely go anywhere without my phone.
Oh yeah.
So if I can have a tuner and a metronome on there, then I never have an excuse, right? If I can, I have the YouTube Music app, so I have the drones that I use on YouTube that I mentioned downloaded on my phone. So I always have what I need to have a focused, successful, efficient practice session, whether it's a quick 20 minutes and I can get something done, or I have hours and hours to really dig in on something. And then the final thing that I wanted to reiterate, because this is another big kind of turning point in my own playing, is, and this is a part of like a practice log and structuring stuff. For me, I never did a really, really detailed practice log. I certainly, would write down what I was working on, kind of like over the course of like have specific goals. But I know a lot of people who really like doing that. and it's really helped them. But for me, I think something that that helped with that concept of being organized. I don't know. Oh no, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this? What were we talking about? Oh no! I had something else come into my. This is a great example of distraction. I have my email pulled up on my computer and I gotta close that because I saw the title and now I'm somewhere else. It was 5 tools. So we talked about the drone. We talked about organizing and structure. So I realized, and this is a great example just now, I have a pretty solid attention span of 20 minutes on any one thing. And I say attention span, and I'm talking about when I'm 100% all in focused, right? So I can sit down and watch a 2-hour movie because I'm passively consuming that, or listen to an hour-long concert or longer because I'm passively a part of that. But to focus doing something, something specific, I really got 20 minutes. And so I think part of the reason that we talk about having all of these different ways to practice, especially in the warm-up category, with play a scale like this. Now let's add articulation. Now let's add dynamics. Now a metronome. Now a metronome on just 2 and 4, or whatever we're doing. Now a drone. Now drone and metronome, and all these different variables. Is that if I need to be practicing to accomplish my goals 3 or 4 hours a day, I look at that as cool. If I'm going to do, I think just for easy math, let's say 2 hours, I need to have 6 20-minute, mini sessions. And then I can pick, and that's kind of more of like the practice logging that I was doing, where it would be, okay, 20 minutes, I'm going to do this, 20 minutes, I'm going to do this. And that was really changed how I was able to get stuff done.
Yeah. So now admittedly, my practicing has gone through all kinds of changes over the course of my life, because, as you get older, you have more responsibilities. Your time tends to be more encumbered. I have a son, you're married also, so you understand that there are certain things that you have to prioritize. And so by nature, I don't have as much time as far as contiguous blocks of time. I don't have as much time as far as, okay, I can take 30 minutes to get into it. I can take an hour to get into it. I don't have an hour to get into it. I might have only an hour. And so, this idea of maximizing, what you get done in the practice room is very important. And my practicing does something that my schedule tends to do. It goes through seasonal changes. All right. So we know that during the school year, it's very the tyranny of the urgent. It's very, you got stuff to do every hour. And everybody wants something from you, like this. And then during the summer months, it's less. It doesn't mean that you're not productive. It just means that it's just less like constant, monotonous, urgent. Everybody needs something from you, kind of a thing. And so my practicing has kind of gone through those kind of changes. Now, maybe I shouldn't admit this publicly, but I've had an on again, off again relationship with logging my practicing. Now, that's not the same as saying that I've been ineffective and effective. I've gone back and forth between being ineffective and effective.
Yeah.
It's more like I've used different strategies, right? So one of the strategies that I used for a long time, which is quite effective, and I'm going to have to figure out how to probably recreate that, is I had a list when I was in the other building. Before we moved to the new building, I had a big dry erase board, And the dry erase board had all kinds of stuff on it. It had a list of things per instrument that I wanted to
Mm.
that I saw as areas for me to improve and specific things for me to practice. And I took a picture
Yeah.
of that image. And so this is like clarinet, flute, saxophone, piano, guitar, bass guitar, composition. It's like it was like lists for each of those things. And
Hmm.
I took a picture of it, and it was the wallpaper. It was on my desktop, on my computer. It was on my phone. The wallpaper on the phone. It was on my tablet. The wallpaper on my tablet. It was everywhere. No pictures of cats on there, but rather just a picture of something that was. And a lot of people do it. And I'm just borrowing from something that that people do, and that is the sticky notes in the bathroom.
Yeah.
So that was highly effective because when you get into the practice room, you don't want to have to start thinking of what it is that you need to practice. For me, it's very much analogous to being on a diet. Okay. So if I'm on a diet, if I wait to eat until I'm really hungry, and then of course couple that with I don't actually have anything on hand, if I have to think about what it is that I'm going to eat, then I'm going to go right, and I'm not even going to be thinking. I'm going to go right to the worst thing.
Yeah.
It's just because there's just a magnetic. It just pulls me over there, and then I come to, and I've already eaten like half of a burger. Like what happened? I don't even know what happened. Right?
Who am I?
Yeah, that's right. I always do better when stuff has been laid out prior. And you hear people talk about this even with like meal preparation. You hear people like, bodybuilders, people that are training, they're cutting down into where their competition weight is going to be, fitness gurus and the like, where like Sunday is their day to like prep the food for the week. And so they make all the food that they're going to have for the week, and they get it all packed up. So then they don't have to think about it, because thinking about it, that's where the trouble is. And I know that maybe that sounds crazy. It maybe sounds like a lack of willpower, but rather it's an acknowledgement that I know that that's my weakness. That's my area of deficiency. And so you have to hedge against whatever your weakness is. And the way that I've hedged against it is by giving myself stuff in my face all the time. I know I need to be doing this, this, and this. So I can't claim that I don't know what to practice. I can't claim that I didn't know that I shouldn't be eating, a double quarter pounder with cheese at McDonald's. Okay. So
go ahead.
And
I think there's another element of that is super important, is the idea of decision fatigue. That it takes energy to have to make that decision every single time. And I agree, it sounds like maybe you don't have willpower, but I think really what it is that willpower is, I have to test my willpower every single time, every single day when I go to practice. And I like to take the decision out of it. And I do this. You talked about, differing schedules. And I talk about this with our students in the summer, particularly, I think is an important concept. What I love about being a part of the, university kind of community is that we have a flexible schedule. But my issue naturally is if I don't have anything on my calendar, I'm not going to get out of bed. Right. So I need that structure in order to be
right.
And I do the same thing with food. If you ever ask me what I want to eat, the answer is always I want to eat a whole cake, right? I'm never excited about doing other stuff, so I have to make sure that those decisions are made in advance. I'm not asking if I want to practice. It's 9 a.m. on Wednesday. That's practice time, right?
Yep.
And I think that that aspect is super, super important. And goes a really long way. Looks like we have a
Yes.
question.
Yeah. So Daniel says, do you guys have any tips on keeping practice up when you have a full-time job that's not related to music? Okay, so let me take a crack, and then Dr. Brooks will take a
Sure.
crack at this. Um, so I've never had a job that was not a music job, but understand the difference between music as a job and you actually practicing. Those are not the same things. They're not the same thing. My schedule is relentless and has been for as long as I can remember. I mean, it's just been packed. Even before I took the job at Ohio State, even before I took this job, I had 5 jobs. No lie, I had 5 jobs when I applied for this job. 5 jobs. So the first job, I was a full-time orchestra director for a school district, full-time. Benny's Insurance and all like that. That's where that came from. The second thing I was a part-time band director in another school district. I'm not even sure that was legal. I don't know that I was allowed to do that because I had a full-time job, but it was an obligation in the evening, so it wasn't during school hours. That was the second job. The third job was I was a freelance musician, so I was gigging, writing music, going to big trade shows, recording with Victor Wooten and doing all kinds of stuff, being concerts, all kinds of music stuff, right? So that was the third thing. The fourth job was I was I was teaching lessons, and I had between 15 and 20 students, right? So that was the fourth job. And the fifth job was I was a part-time band director at a church. Okay. So I had 5 jobs, and and the thing is that sometimes when you play a lot, it's easy for you to start to consider that as the same as practicing. Oh yeah, well, I played my horn all day today. Yeah, but you were kind of playing the same stuff that you always play, and you didn't cover any ground. Now, granted, I will argue, again, and there's an issue here. We know the 10,000 hours thing. Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers. Often is the case is that people will say that, see, you got to log your 10,000 hours of practice. Okay, I'm not saying that practicing 10,000 hours is a bad thing. Of course, it's a good thing, but you should understand that the examples that he was using were not just of guys practicing. When he was talking about the Beatles, he was including performance time when they were on the stage. So that is a valuable part of improving as a musician, and is part of that 10,000 hours. However, performing on the stage is not the same as that personal time in the practice room. You can't accomplish the same sorts of things there. So when you're busy, when you have a relentless schedule, that's when it's even more important to be organized, to go into the practice room with a particular agenda, to use a timer, to use a practice log, and in the logging system, like I said, the logging system may be more of a mental logging system where you have visual references of the stuff that you need to be working on, as opposed to actually logging the number of minutes and what the tempo is and stuff like that. Now, I have my students fill out practice logs. I've had them do that, and I'm reevaluating some of that right now. But I've had them do that because that's the easiest way for there to be a certain kind of transparency, so that I can better help the student. So they can say, well, this is what I practiced this week. And I'm thinking, well, this guy is terrible at playing stuff in 12 keys, but he practiced that like 10 minutes a day. But he's really good at this other thing over here, and he practices that like for 2 hours a day. Yeah, so it makes it it makes some of that kind of stuff obvious, and often is the case that we can't see ourselves. Knowing yourself is maybe the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why we need community. That's why we need other people. That's why even when we talk about in Christianity, the Bible, there's such an emphasis on fellowship and community. It's because there's so much work that gets done as far as improvement of the individual just by being in fellowship in community with other people that are going to be able to see things, going to be able to point stuff out. Hey man, what's wrong with you? Why are you saying this kind of stuff right now? You're looking really socially awkward right now. You need to get out more, whatever it is,
Yeah.
So go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah. And I know we only got a couple of minutes left. So
right.
So thinking about that, keeping up practice while you have a full-time job, the biggest thing that has helped me with that, and I agree with that, obviously both Dr. Fender and myself are full-time at the university, and that's a music-related job, so I'm doing music, but it's not the same as making meaningful progress for my own playing, is I have to have it scheduled into my day, and that
100%.
removing the decision of, do I want to practice today?
Yep.
Do I have time? If I, even for myself, it's always no. Do I want to practice? Very rarely. Do I have energy to practice right now? Most of the time, no. And just because it's easier to, watch another episode of whatever on Netflix, it's easier to, do something mindless, obviously. And I do the same thing. You kind of use that fitness analogy. I think that's the same thing. Do I ever want to work out? No. Do I work out about 5 days a week? Yeah. Right. Because I have it set into a part of my day, and I still do that, having that practice. That's stuff that I have our students do, when they're on break for summer, or even some of the breaks during the year. It's like, yeah, I know, I have all this time, but really I still need to have structure. So that can help. And then I think the other thing that's really, really important is knowing, is obviously having goals with your playing, but making sure that you are working on a balance of things that you should be working on, and balancing that with things that you really just like doing. And that helps it, to make it, for lack of a better term, just more palatable to go and do that stuff. And I always do a
pinch of salt.
I do the should do first, and then I end with the want to do. And that's how I worked on a lot of my, my doubles. So obviously we're both saxophone players, but both Dr. Wallace and I play flute and clarinet and other instruments professionally, and we teach those instruments too. And I was, for flute and clarinet particularly, if I had to pick playing saxophone or clarinet, I'm going to pick saxophone. So I had learned really early on that I had to play clarinet first. So that way I would do my 20 minutes, do my 30 minutes of playing, and I really, I get it over with, and then I could do the thing that I wanted to do. And that really helped me. So I get my 10 minutes of scales in, and then I get to do something, something else, and just finding your time, and, getting good practice sessions when you can. Also not having the burden, we were talking about having, 2 hours of practice, 4 hours of practice. 10 minutes can make a difference. 20 minutes can make a difference. Maybe I don't have a 2-hour block, when 6 a.m. is a great practice time. I agree with that.
Yeah. So this is, and by the way, this is one of our colleagues. This is Dr. Keith Newton. And Dr. Keith Newton's a great saxophone player. He did a doctorate at Ohio State. This is a heavy dude. Talk about a guy that has a job unrelated to music. It's because he's multi-skilled, multi-talented. He's got all kinds of all the computer tech stuff. He's all over that. But it is that time. I know you got to get going, and I do want to say something to you after we close the show down here. So we're going to go ahead and shut it down. Thanks everybody for being here, being in the spot. Make sure you go back and check out the first episode where we were talking about careers in music. This episode has been really focused on practice routine and juicing as much out of the practice room as you can get. And that's going to be our time. Y'all be well. Take care of yourself and each other. Peace.